Today we are going to focus on what is a perfect square and a square root. And if you would, please take a look at this rectangle. Notice the sides are 4 and 8. And when you multiply those two together, you get 32 square units. This is the area of that rectangle. Now what I would like for you to do is let's now consider this square, this purple square. So if you notice, it has sides of 4. And when we multiply them together, you get 16 square units. So 16 is a perfect square. It made a square. Not like before in our previous example where you had the rectangle. Now what we could do now is say that the square root of 16 equals 4. And how do you get that number? Well, look. There's 4 squares on each of the sides. Now let's look at this next one. This is a 8-sided figure. So you have, 8 units here and 8 units here. So that's going to be, when you multiply 8 times 8, you get 64, and it's 64 square units. So 64 is a perfect square. Now, if you take and you find the square root, that's a radical sign. It's a fun name to say, isn't it? That's 64. The square root of 64 is 8. Now, you can also write this exponentially. Let's go back up here. If we did 4 times 4, well, isn't that the same thing as saying 4 squared? That's why we call it 2 square, because when you multiply the same number by itself, you're going to get a perfect square. Look here at this one with 64. You have 8 squared. Why did you get 8 squared? Because you multiplied 8 times 8. So let's make a little note. When you multiply a number by itself, you make a perfect square. Oops. All right, so now let's look at these. Let's look at our first example here. What do you notice? Well, it has a side of 5 and a width of 5. So 5 squared is 25, making 25 a perfect square. What's the square root of 5? 25? It's 5. Very nice. So now let's look at this one. What do you notice? 3 and 3. So that's 3 squared, which is 9. You have 9 squares there, right? So the square root of 9 is 3, because it goes back to the length of that one side. So check this one out. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 and 7. So 7 squared is 49. So the square root, of 49 equals 7. All right, take a moment and try to figure this one out. I'll let you have a head start. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 9 squared, which is 81. And the square root of 81 is 9, because you needed that 9 for the length of one of your sides. Now let's look at this next video. What does it have? It has sides of 6. So that's 6 squared, which is 36. So the square root of 36 is 6. How about this one? So that's 4 and 4. So 4 squared is 16. And the square root of 16 is 4. You making those connections? So here you have 2. 2 squared is 4. And isn't that how many little boxes we have there? It sure is. So the square root of 4 is 2. All right, how about that big monster? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now it's always best to check, just in case it's a rectangle. You need to double check to make sure it's a square. So that's 10 squared, which is 100. So the square root, of 100 is 10. And our last example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 8 squared, which is 64. So you have 64 square units. The absolute value of 64 is 8. So here's I hope you got a little bit out of this explanation of perfect squares and square roots.